This has been a very difficult time for our state. We have stared evil in the eye and watched good, prayerful people killed in one of the most sacred of places. We were hurt and broken, and we needed to heal. We were able to start that process, not by talking about issues that divide us, but by holding vigils, by hugging our neighbors, by honoring those we lost, and by falling to our knees in prayer.
South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, during her announcement yesterday that she would move to have the Confederate campaign flag removed from the grounds of the South Carolina State Capitol. Joining me now, Becket Adams, staff correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Becket, thanks for checking in with us today from Newsmax Washington.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Now, Becket, your new column in the Washington Examiner is about media reaction to Governor Haley's move. You write, and I quote, "Not 24 hours after the alleged shooter had carried out his mission, media turned its attention almost immediately to the Confederate battle flag flying outside the state's Capitol building." This is what's, I think, puzzling to a lot of people. Yes, there are pictures of the assailant with the Confederate flag, but did the flag itself play a role in the slaughter in that historic church in Charleston?
Right. I think that's the argument we're having now, and my issue that I have is I think it's an argument that we can maybe wait on. We've been doing this since far back, going back to the Columbine shootings. Immediately after that happened, we were blaming video games and Marilyn Manson and violent movies. And here we are now blaming the Confederate battle flag for the tragic shooting. I think we get into a strange area when we start blaming imagery for actions, when we start saying people are inspired, because it's a difficult thing to define. And my issue that I had with it is the press. You had 9 people were shot and murdered in a racially motivated act of terror, and then we immediately move on to talk about a flag flying outside the state capitol. I'm not sure what that's supposed to fix or what it's supposed to cure, and we are seeing it's now catching fire, this sort of story about the Confederate battle flag. Before I even stepped into the studio right now, eBay had just announced that it had moved to prohibit the sale of any and all images of the Confederacy, which to me seems like a poorly conceived idea. I don't know how they enforce that, and that I guess if they prohibit all sales, that means they can't sell movies including Gettysburg, Gods and Generals. They can't even sell a photo or a painting of Robert E. Lee surrendering.
Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind is another. Any Lynyrd Skynyrd album, any album by the rock band Alabama. It just goes on and on and on. And the big question I come to is, what do we get? What's the end goal? Does this fix anything, or is this kind of a placebo that makes people in media and politics feel better about themselves?
Well, we take a look at this, and while all the focus has been on the imagery, what of the assailant, the man who admitted to the slaughter, Dylan Roof? There is talk now that it was more mental illness than racism, perhaps, in his makeup. Your take on the sad and horrible story of Dylan Roof?
Well, a lot of the stuff about him being on medication, perhaps a lot of that's still really speculative, so I'm not sure if we were able to say at this moment whether or not he was 100% mentally unstable. Surely what we do know about the shooting, he seemed to have his wits about him, the way he planned it and pulled it off, and the getaway later. But one thing we do know a good deal about is his manifesto, where he clearly lays out that he has a deep, passionate hatred for African Americans. And he says in this alleged manifesto that a lot of that started with the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman case a couple years back. What's interesting about that, I think, is should it prove to be true, this is his manifesto, and that's what helped radicalize him. If we're going to be blaming symbols right now for the murder, do we then also have a conversation about media's terrible handling and misreporting of the Trayvon Martin case? And then do we start blaming media for having a hand in radicalizing this 21-year-old man? Now that is a very compelling question, because so many cable networks were breathless in their coverage of that whole Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case. And certainly there are questions as to the ethical conduct of those who covered that entire controversy. Before we go, a minute remains, back to politics.
Did Nikki Haley come out of this with the most to gain in terms of her national stature in the party, in stark contrast to a guy like Lindsey Graham, who seemed to pivot at the last second in view of his presidential campaign? Sorry, we got about 40 seconds for your response to that, Becket.
Sure. I think it's a bit early to call that right now. Like Lindsey Graham, Governor Haley did resist efforts in 2013 to have the flag removed, but she is the public servant. She's the governor of the people of South Carolina, and the outpouring of concern and the furor over the flag was enough that she is now responding to the will of the people. What I thought was interesting is that many in media were demanding she does something, and Monday she announced she's going to do something, and then the criticisms kept up. They kept doing it, saying, well, it was a little too late. So at this point, I feel like she can't win no matter what she does. I do think good for her as a public servant. If the people of her state say they want it removed, then she has it removed. So that's a plus in her book, I suppose.
Well, you can certainly take it as one component of leadership is listening, and she was listening to some loud voices. Becket Adams from the Washington Examiner, our thanks for your time. There's more of Newsmax Now just